Hello, everybody. We're looking today at form and shape. These are quite decorative stones, pebbles, in my collection, and we need to. The idea is to work out how to create the form and how to put on the decoration. So you'll be learning quite a few, or reconsidering quite a few new skills. Now, one of Hazelstone's mantra is form before decoration. So when we're working, we're going to create the form first and think about the decorative details, maybe after, maybe before, depending on how we're going. Sorry, start again. I'm going to start with this one, which is a big rounded pebble. Now, if you want to create that gradation of shape, you need to work wet in wet. Now, I'm not going to touch any of the other pebbles at the moment. I'm just going to work on that one. It's a very white pebble, very bluey white pebble. So I'm going to put a blue wash. I'm going to put a wash overall. This is just water. And I'm only going on this particular pebble here, coating it with the water. This will help the color to run when I put the color on. So I'm starting off with plain water, just on that shape. Subtext of the lessons this term will also be water management. Now, if I'm going to mix a blue, I don't want a very strong blue, it's just a sort of vague indication of what I want. So because this is wet, this should go over quite evenly. I should be able to move it round the whole area. And guide the paint where I want it to go. Now the heaviest shadow is here. So if I tip the paper and move the paint over to that area there, that's a good start, apart from anything else. There we are. Now, that's wet. Stating the obvious, but that's wet. This is what you've got to think about when you're working with paint. I want to introduce a darker tone on this area here, but I don't want a hard edge. I want it to creep up. Now, if I put it in, if I add my darker color and it's too wet, it'll just gallop over the whole thing and not give the effect I want. So you must, when you're adding your color, make sure that you don't add more water. So what I've done is make the color, dry the brush on a rag, pick up your darker color and put it in where you want it to go, and push it a little bit where you want it to work to, and give it time. Give it time. Give it time to work its magic. A lot of watching paint. Now that's working quite nicely, but I could do with it being a little bit darker in some places. So I make my paint stronger. Stronger paint is more pigment to water. Now I haven't taken any extra water on, so I can take this darker pigment and put it in around the edge here. Tip the brush, tip the Right, you've got to watch where it's running. It's running. I'm drying the brush. It's running in the wrong place there, so I'm going to take that back a bit. You can do this when it's wet. You can play with it when it's wet. Come on, Daddy. Whoops. Now, supposing I want to put in this little mark here. And there's the odd bit round here. Well, this is drying, so it's not working quite so well over here. Now I want this shadow to be deeper and less blue. So I'm going to add some burnt sienna to my mix. As you know, burnt sienna and French ultramarine give you a nice dark. But I've got to remember not to make the paint thinner. I've got to make the paint thicker. So I'm going to take this in now, around here. That corner there is very dark, so let's just see what we can do. That's still damp there, so I can go in with the damp paint there. But it's drying, so I'm beginning to get an edge that I don't want. But you can see that already that's creating a sort of rounded form. Now, if we look at this one next, this is a lump of sandstone, sort of yellowy color. So I'm going to go now into, if I can find it, either yellow ochre or raw sienna, whichever one you happen to have. Now again, I only want a pale wash on this. I don't want anything too dramatic. Bear in mind that watercolor dries lighter. If that's still wet there, if you leave between the two a minuscule line so that the paint surfaces don't actually touch, you can keep the two of them separate. It depends on what you want to do. You might want them separate. You might want, finish that one off. Can't see the end of that one, but we'll give it an end. Now, there are darker areas of this. Remember, form before decoration. So if I'm going to add some dark around here while this is wet, helps you see that very, very fine line. These are one of the things you can do with watercolor. Okay, quite a delicate line. And we can introduce an even darker area here while it's still wet. See, because the paint is thicker, it's not dashing into the wet area. It's just taking its time. It just adds that little touch of je ne sais quoi. Don't want it too much there. These two are quite light together, but that one is over this one, so I'm going to increase this shadow a bit here. Now I've got a blob there that I don't like, so I'm just going to clean the brush, dry it, because paint is drying. There we are. So again, we're beginning to get the form. This is drying rather strongly, but I don't want it to do that. So I've got a dry brush, and I'm just, well, it's a wet dry brush. I'm just working the paint back so that it doesn't give that hard edge, which is so ungrateful. Don't try and do it with water. You get a cauliflower. There we are. Doing the right way. So we're looking for form, and the darker we make these joins, the farther back and the more prominent the various pebbles become. Now this one over here is got very sharp edges on it. So instead of using wet on wet, we're going to have to use dry on dry. The first thing to do is to put a wash on it. That will give us the ground color, if you like, over the whole thing. And then that has to dry absolutely 100% before you do any more. Otherwise, you don't get a soft edge, you get a hard edge. A bit difficult to see what's going on there. So, just going to run a very pale color over this, over the whole surface, not trying to produce any shape or form on it at all. I'm just putting the base color on the whole surface. One of those things where you just have to think ahead a bit. You know you're going to do something to this. Not quite sure what happens there. We'll give it a bit of something to play with. Right, so that's just got to dry, so I'm not even going to touch it until it's absolutely bone dry, which is probably next week. Now we've got this one. This is another one with sharp edges. And it's a rather nice piece of slate, sort of Prussian blue, isn't it? So instead of using ultramarine, this time I'm having fun by using Prussian blue as my base. I'm leaving that little line dry there so I can go right up to that. But over here it's wet. Where it's wet, I leave that tiny, tiny line so that they don't run one into the other. Like you'll notice that sometimes I put water on it and sometimes I don't. That's because I forgot, not for any esoteric reason. Now this one down here does have some of that same Prussian blue sort of colour on it. I think that could go darker. It's quite a dark surface, so I think I'll make that a bit darker. Right. So if we run a very pale wash over this one, again, I'm sorry, I forgot to put the water on first. It does make for a better wash, but it's such a small area. Now this is a rounded stone, so while that's wet, I don't mind that because that's actually helping. There. I'm going to run some of the darker paint in here, down this edge, to give a bit of form to this one. See how that one's blending and melding as we're working. What happens? This one I played with and I've got a sharp edge, so I've got to do something about that in future. Now while it's wet, I'm going to play with some of these veins with darker paint because it's beautifully wet. If you go in with quite thick paint, you'll get the effect because it won't spread so far. And while it's wet, I can push some even darker there. And down here. So it'll spread. Right, this one here, I'm going to do a bit of forward planning. This is a candle, just an ordinary candle. And if I look at this, it's got some sort of striations of white. So I'm going to rub this candle grease on here. Quite a lot down here. The thing about candle is you can't take it off. And also you can't see where you put it. So, well, you can if you look carefully. To the paper. Right, just a little bit like that. And form first before decoration. So I'm going to put some water on there first. This time it's quite important because I want it pale and I don't want it everywhere. I want it rounded. It's a rounded stone, and round the edges it's quite shadowy. So I need to put that in at this stage. But I don't want it to
ends in 10 minutes, ma'am.
Right. Thank you. I don't want to have it galloping over the whole page. And I'll keep trying to remember that it's got to dry lighter. The little shadow there, this one is casting a shadow on here, so we need to make a start for that. And it's quite a different shape. I think that's probably enough on that one. Hope it spreads a bit. This one is also a bluey toned stone. It's the same sort of stone as that one. So I'll put the water on. There we are. And pick up a bit of the blue paint and look where the shadows are. There's a shadow here. Quite a strong shadow here. And then take the paint. Down there. Right, so what I've done basically is to create some form on the actual pebbles themselves, either by doing it wet and wet, in fact only by doing it wet and wet. The dry edged ones aren't sufficiently dry yet. You can tell it's not dry because the paper is cockled, and it'll flatten out over the week when we'll go on with the next one. If you can, I haven't done this one, but we'll get to that next week. If you can get that far, you'll have made a good start. Don't feel you have to stick to my colours. See what colours you can find in the picture yourself, and go with them. And then next week we'll do a bit of salt and carry on working over the wax crayon. So see what you can do, and I'll see you next week.